Welcome back to the Talking Leadership TV podcast series. Thanks for joining me again. Today's guest is Tom Dawkins. He is the co-founder and CEO of StartSomeGood, a social enterprise which helps people design, launch and grow social impact projects. And he's also the co-founder of Lend for Good, a new crowd lending platform for growth-ready impact enterprises. StartSomeGood provides fundraising and community infrastructure for social entrepreneurs and designs and delivers impact accelerators and capability building programs for partners including Optus, ING, the United Nations Development Program and the City of Sydney. Tom is the host of the Good Hustle Social Enterprise Design course, which has graduated over 200 social enterprise founders. The goal is to give emerging social entrepreneurs the skills they need to successfully launch and run their impact businesses, including the strength of purpose and resilience to survive the ups and downs of the entrepreneurial journey. Tom was previously the founder of the youth not-for-profit Vibewire, the first digital communications director for Ahsoka in Washington, D.C., and the founding program director of the Australian Changemakers Festival, as well as being the founding director of the Social Enterprise Council of New South Wales and the ACT. Tom is also a director of the Centre for Social Impact. Had a great chat with Tom around leadership and its intersection with social enterprise and innovation. I hope you enjoy today's podcast, but enough from me, and I'll hand over to Tom. Tom, thanks for joining me today, mate. Now, the purpose of Talking Leadership TV, as my guests will know, and we've had a discussion offline, is to talk all things leadership. And I'm particularly interested in how that intersects with innovation and social enterprise, which is your field of expertise. So my question today more broadly is, how do these things intersect? But before we get into that, why work in that social enterprise space? What motivates you to do that, mate?
Thanks. Great question, Eric. And thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be on the show. Look, I kind of discovered social enterprise in the way that many people do, because it solved a problem I had in funding the work the kind of social change work I wanted to do. I stumbled into it, really. I didn't know anything about social enterprise, but I set up my first, by the time I finished university, I'd set up 3 nonprofits, all of them about mobilizing young people as more active citizens in different forms. The first, a high school student organization, the second, a university student organization. And then midway through uni, launched a nonprofit called Vibewire Youth Services, which is still around today. It's now 23 years old or something crazy like that. I led it for the first 8 years. And Vibewire was all about giving younger Australians, by which we meant under 30, so young adults, opportunities to develop their insights into social issues and trends, to become more active and effective citizens in how they created change, both through the political process and outside it, through volunteering and social entrepreneurship and so on. And fundamentally, though, it was really hard to raise money for. Now, some of that is just the challenges of being a university student who really doesn't know much about anything, trying to convince people to give you money. Part of that very much was the challenge of innovation, that we were trying to mobilize our generation in new ways using technology as a focus, and culture and storytelling and so on. And it wasn't proven that would work, the innovation challenge that I know we're going to talk more about later. And thirdly, we weren't tax deductible, because there actually isn't a tax deductible charitable category for making a better democracy in Australia. We weren't enough of an education organization, or enough of an arts organization, or enough of a kind of service provider to achieve that beneficial tax status for any of them. And that just made fundraising challenging. And I just, being a problem solver, and I guess naturally entrepreneurial, was just casting around trying to figure out who would pay for this, who would pay, who would support the kind of projects we wanted to run. And over time, discovered that there's this whole set of people who will potentially, or a whole different way to think about funding projects, which is not just by, writing an application or delivering a single pitch and hoping someone will write a check. Not that even then anyone wrote checks, but will deliver those funds. But rather, who are you creating value for directly, and are they willing to pay for that value? And so by the time I left, we were about 2/3 earned revenue, a mix of both participant paying. We opened the first co-working space in Australia, for instance. Whatever fish burners may say, we opened 2 years ahead of them. And so that was a user paid model in the typical co-working space way. But we also did a lot of work for, we discovered sponsorship. as a business model. So we had a youth-oriented film festival that toured around the country in partnership with Dendy Cinemas. That was sponsored by corporate partners because, youth culture, very trendy. Great chance to advertise at them. And also service provision. So we had become experts at how you communicate with and engage kind of, more purpose-driven young Australians. And there were lots of other organizations out there who really want to engage those people. So we ran a major youth consultative process for the city of Brisbane. We did work for the Human Rights Commission in New South Wales in terms of engaging young people. So a real blend of different service provision, but all of that is the social enterprise model, which is, can you deliver an actual business service? Can you create value for someone that they will pay for? But in the course of the creation of that value, or the type of value that is created, there's broader value created for the community, the environment, and future generations. And so stumbled on, I always like to say, we invented the social enterprise, and we did for ourselves. We were the millionth person to think of it. But it's just another example of how, social enterprise is one of those ideas that inevitably comes up. People in some ways don't, it helps, if you explain it to people, as we're talking about it now, it often helps. But in many ways, people naturally can find their way to it very often just through that process of trying to figure out how to get things done, how to solve problems, and try to figure out who the stakeholders and potential partners for that might be. And so that's what I guess led me into more that social enterprise focus. And I then moved to the US for 4 years. And that was a real focus of my time over there for the first 2 years, working for an organization called Ashoka, who literally invented the phrase social entrepreneurship 50 years ago. So literally the first organization on earth to really be talking about, describing this stuff. And then 2 years in San Francisco working for a innovation for good lab in Silicon Valley called Hope Lab. And not so much my experience at Hope Lab, but just being in San Francisco for those 2 years taught me so much about what supporting innovation looks like and can feel like. And that really inspired the launch of StartSomeGood 12 years ago, while I was living in San Francisco, to try and take some of those lessons, learnings, and approaches from the commercial startup world and apply them to people doing social innovation and social enterprise startups.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great foundational definition of where the social enterprise sort of sits, and looks like you were earmarked to be in this industry or this area of life from the start, I guess. Let me ask you one thing, because I've spoken to a lot of entrepreneurial individuals in my podcasting, and I want to ask you, given that you're in the mix, do you think the people that do the kind of work that you do and lead in the way that you do are entrepreneurial by nature? They're entrepreneurs by any other name? Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where I sit exactly on the nature versus nurture debate when it comes to entrepreneurialism. I think it's obviously a product of, maybe there are elements of your fundamental nature and characteristic. I believe they do believe there's, some hard-coded risk aversion versus risk tolerance in people. So there's got to be a certain element of risk tolerance, but that's not to say that someone who might be kind of coded in that way slightly differently couldn't overcome that in certain circumstances. So it's certainly also a matter of the encouragement, the culture you're in, the opportunity you have. And that's really what struck me in San Francisco, that just how different it felt and how much more encouraging that was. And how now I didn't arrive in San Francisco planning to start another startup myself. I mean, I was taking up a new job. I had a sponsored working visa. I had enough to do and a great city and a great state to explore. Kind of, in some ways, on an intellectual level, the last thing I needed was some massive side hustle to keep me super stressed and busy. But there's just, there really is something almost in the water there, that you meet so many people who are pursuing a dream. Everyone's always asking you what you're working on. Everyone's super excited about whatever your idea or you should do that. You should try that you find yourself potentially, thanks to that context and that surrounding, doing something that you might not in different circumstances. I mean, as another little example, because I think about this a lot, one of my close friends at university was the first member of her family to go to university. On my dad's side of my family, I'm one of 14 cousins, and I'm the least educated member of my generation. I only have an undergraduate degree. Literally every other member of my generation has at least honors, and almost all of them have masters or double degree, and we have 3 PhDs. So like a really highly educated family. Both my parents went to university, And I always used to think about how different the context of that decision was. Like, it's not just about what your natural inclination is. It's, I think context is so important that for me, it wasn't even a decision. To not go to university would have been a massive decision, would have been, quite, would have possibly, my parents would have supported that as well. This is the other important context, super supportive parents who were willing to let me try and fail. And that creates a safety net. And that's, to me, what privilege is in many ways, is the fact that you have the ability to fail. Failure to me doesn't cost me as much, in the sense that I have a supportive family. I couldn't find myself on the streets, I don't believe. There'd be people who would help me no matter what happened. Other people don't have that. And so, for me, I spent as much time thinking about whether to go to university as I spent thinking about whether to do year 11. In theory, you can finish high school after year 10, but it never crossed my mind for even a split second that wasn't a real decision. And in the same way, university just felt like year 13. Like, I'm not dropping, like, who drops out at this stage either. Whereas, of course, for my friend, it was a massive, she had to like visualize something that no one around her had done and then figure out how to do it. And it was such a bigger decision for her. And so I think about that a lot in the context of entrepreneurship as well. That, while I do think there is a strong personal element, I think all of that is more deeply affected, can only emerge essentially in the right context, the right environment. And if we build a more supportive environment, and this is the work where, our mission that Starts Some Good, that if you create a slightly more supportive environment, you offer more opportunities, you lower the barriers slightly. We never claim that we make entrepreneurship or starting a social enterprise easy. That's impossible. It's really hard. But you can make it a little bit easier in important ways at important stages. And that if you do that, all sorts of new people will emerge with great ideas around the work that needs doing, and who maybe don't think of themselves as entrepreneurs, maybe wouldn't, if you ask them, are you an entrepreneur person, often would say no. But there's something that they've decided needs to be fixed in the world, and their own personal purpose plus that context and opportunity has provided them with the moment where they feel like they can actually try and make that happen.
Yeah, that's an amazingly interesting response. Look, I'm definitely not in the school of labeling people for the sake of doing it. It just helps me to categorize in my own mind because I'm a simple human being, so I need categories to help me deal with the world that I deal with. And I just see it's fascinating for my Australian guests that have been on the podcast that have gone to America and been immersed in that culture around entrepreneurship, whether it's social or for profit. In America, it's quite a different bag than Australia. I think they live and breathe. What's your thing? What are you doing? What's your project? Whereas I think in Oz, it's a little different. And to get back to your beginning point around levels of education, I think it's horses for courses. So for me, if you're inclined to be an academic, you will pursue that pathway. If you're not, an academic pathway or even getting TAFE qualifications, whatever the level of qualification is, you're doing it for the end point. So if there was a certificate in how to start a social enterprise, if those that are that way oriented will go in and do it, and hopefully if they're listening to this discussion will know that it isn't easy, but there are ways to start, and there are people that can potentially point you to what are the pitfalls, because if you're trying to start something that hasn't been started before, I think you're going to make as many kick as many goals as have as many hiccups along that process. And it sounds like you've been there and done a lot of that. Does that ring true for you, mate?
No, absolutely. And that's a big part of, the work we do these days is through things like we have a social enterprise design course. There are others out there, but ours is called Good Hustle. And it's exactly that idea that we think everything's different in a way. Like part of what's great, I think, about the social enterprise movement in general is lots of grassroots entrepreneurs, that it's not a world dominated. Some people probably want it to be, that it will be a little bit more hard driving business savvy if it was, more MBAs and what have you. But it's often people with a lived experience, which I think is incredibly valuable, who've been through something, seen something, have an insight, and are trying to build, a kind of, in some ways, a custom designed vehicle to deliver that impact, but in a sustainable way, long term, using business, using the market as a sustainability tool or a core part of that strategy. And so they're always different, but they're also very similar. that there's really consistent core elements. And so one of the principles of our Good Hustle course, for instance, is that it provides what we say is kind of the core, it runs through the core foundational elements of every successful social enterprise. So your particular theory of change might be different, but every social enterprise has to have a theory of change or an impact model, depending on what language you want to use. Obviously, to be an enterprise, you also need a business model. And again, there are certain key, there's a certain startup science around how you can build successful business models, human-centered design, testing and iteration and so on. And much like in any good startup course, while the specifics of that are different, often the mechanisms or the approach, it can be applied broadly across almost any context. Every entrepreneur we cover personal self-care, sustainability, is it because every founder is going to struggle with personal sustainability. We cover pitch because everyone needs a pitch. We don't cover we don't spend as much time, for instance, on legal structures because those options vary based on jurisdiction. So it's impossible to do a universal descriptor. We talk a little bit about pros and cons of for-profit versus non-profit structures because this is often a point of confusion in the social enterprise, or for people who are getting into the social enterprise world, is that social enterprise is not actually about a particular legal structure. You can have any legal structure. It could be a for-profit, a non-profit, a cooperative, a sole trader. Social enterprise is about doing business in a way that puts impact at the heart and has a very clearly articulated impact model. We make impact by. Also, we make money by, and sometimes those are one and the same, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes you make money by selling coffees, but you make impact by employing people to make those coffees who are recently arrived refugees getting their first work experience in Australia. So it's often a matter of, the impact model. In our case, they are one and the same. How do we make money? We help people raise money, or we provide, we build their capacity through courses. How do we make impact? We help people raise money, or we build their capacity through our courses. So for us, those are one and the same. But even that brings up its own tricky trade-offs. If the way you make the money is the way you make your impact, there's always a little bit of a, always a bit of a trade-off between those things. We increase our impact by giving more people access to these opportunities. That's our core mission.
Yeah,
if we gave it all away, we wouldn't exist. Yeah, so finding that balance that's the trick. That's what's unique about social enterprise is you have to constantly think about both of those, that they are equally important. And that's the difference between, say, an organization that is, fundamentally about business and about profit maximization, but then they do some good in addition to that. They might give away 1% of those profits, or they might have a staff volunteer day, or they might have a foundation that does some granting. All of that's great. I'm not trying to disparage any of that. Just none of that makes you a social enterprise, because to be a social enterprise versus just a socially minded enterprise, you might say, not to get too fine upon it, is the centrality of that impact, that it's right at the heart of the business, and in many ways, equally important. There's no point being profitable. We would say, there's absolutely no point, in StartSomeGood being profitable if we're not also impactful. We need to be profitable. We need to be profitable so that we can keep being impactful into the future. But we don't want one without the other.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it's a good distinction there. If you're running a for-profit business and you're doing things like grants or all the things you just mentioned, you're not necessarily a social enterprise, and not that.
So do those things though.
Yes.
Social,
yes.
Not doing those. Yeah. In fact, give your grants to social enterprises, I would say.
Yeah,
or sponsor us to run a great program for them.
Yeah, some help in that sense. I get that. So look, Tom, I want to bring us to the innovation question and that definition from that social enterprise view of the world. Now, in the worlds that I've worked in, innovation has very can have a very fixed meaning, and I come from ag and fishery, so when we talk about innovation from an industry perspective, it has specific meanings, a lot of times attached to IT, but other times attached to different types of research, for example. I'm interested from that leadership space perspective. What does innovation look like in that social enterprise arena, or at least what's your view of it?
I mean, broadly, not just in social enterprise, but let's just talk kind of social good writ large. I think the sector has really struggled with innovation. So innovation, I mean, in any context, means something that's new and different from the status quo. It could be a new process, a new product, a new market, a new approach to marketing. But you're doing something different from the past in order for it to be innovation. And innovation, by definition, is things not yet proven to work. One of my beliefs is that as soon as it's proven, it's no longer innovation. It could still be innovative, but in terms of that kind of innovation curve, it's not true innovation yet, because true innovation is always uncertain. You can't promise what the outcomes are going to be when you're innovating. As soon as you can promise what the outcome is going to be, not innovating anymore, could still be innovative, which is to say ahead of the bulk of the market. And the challenge is that traditionally the social sector always wants to fund, and I literally quote this from grant criteria as I've seen, proven models of social innovation. And of course, proven models of social innovation is a contradiction in terms. It would be a little bit like, and it's funny, we do it in some spaces but not others. It'd be like if we only funded science, if the scientists could tell us up front exactly what the results of the experiment were going to be. I mean, you wouldn't need to run the experiment then. And it is so different from what I experienced in San Francisco in particular, but the commercial startup world in general, which is about possibility, not certainty. And in some ways, the commercial startup world has almost the opposite bias. If it's too safe and too certain, you're going to return. You like, this is a good little business concept here. This could be reasonably profitable. No one wants to invest in that. It has to at least have the possibility of monopolizing some emergent sector and earning monopoly-style returns on capital in the future. So in some ways, the opposite bias. The commercial startup world is always trying to hit home runs. And so some of the market failure there is like perfectly good, what would be singles or second base. I'm mixing my sports metaphors here for different markets, but hitting singles or doubles, to stick with baseball for a moment. But for the social change sector, the preference is always the certain single over the possible home run. And that comes from a couple of things. Partly there's a scarcity mindset. Traditionally in the social sector, no one has as much money as they think they need, and the world is very big and filled with very complex problems and challenges. And so anyone who's focusing on any of those true social challenges is always on some level feeling slightly overwhelmed by the complexity and scale of that challenge and their desire to do more and more and more good. But how do you do that? And so everyone feels like no matter how cashed up a given charity or foundation or how big a given government grant is, it's never enough. And so in a world where it's never enough, no one wants to waste it on things that don't work. Lots of inverted commas here if anyone's listening to the audio and not watching the video. And so that creates, and that brings us to, one who's going to talk about this concept I call the paradox of innovation. And I really saw this in San Francisco, because people often think that, San Francisco, Silicon Valley is just this incredible concentration of super smart people doing brilliant things. And I'm fond of telling people actually that I think Silicon Valley is the world's largest concentration of dumb ideas. That if you are looking for a really dumb idea, there's nowhere you'll find a dumb idea quicker than San Francisco and the Silicon Bay area. Just like if you're looking for a really crap film, you'll find it in Hollywood. You need a place that's producing lots of stuff. And the reason that you find lots of dumb ideas, because that's also what innovation looks like. Innovation mostly doesn't work. It's an experiment, and most experiments fail. But they're not really failure, of course, because you've ruled out one thing, and that's incremental progress towards figuring out the right thing. And so I feel like they get that in the commercial startup world, that no one is smart enough to know upfront what's going to work. And so you even speak to the world's most successful angel investors, and they're like, I can't pick winners. I think I have a slightly higher ability to have a slightly higher win percentage than maybe other people, because I'm good at what I do. But I still get it wrong 95% of the time. That's fine, provided that the 5% within that 5% is, the occasional Uber or Dropbox or Airbnb or what have you, like a true breakthrough. But you can't tell what they are up front. And so what I call the innovation paradox is the idea that good ideas look like good ideas, but great ideas look like bad ideas. And great ideas look like bad ideas because they tend to challenge our assumptions in some way. A good idea looks like a good idea because it normally is just an incremental advancement on something that we already understand and is well, is well understood and sounds sensible on some level. Like, I don't know, like Uber was always a good idea. I don't think it's really a great idea, but like more being able to see how far away, the killer app really of Uber was just the certainty of how close your cab was, which used to be the bit that used to drive everyone crazy. I don't mind waiting for a cab. It's not knowing how long I'm waiting, having to be out on the street just forever. That, it's a great idea, but like not, just a simple actually extension of that. Wouldn't it be good to just know where they were in proximity to you? Good idea. Whereas Airbnb, I think, was a little bit more of a great idea because it kind of changed some fundamental assumptions about how people interacted. And a lot of people said that will never work. For a long time, people said people are not going to let strangers come and stay inside their house. Like that's just not something people would do. And that's often characteristics of a great idea, is that people will say it won't work. People will never do that. The thing is, they'll mostly be right, because most ideas proposing that people are going to do something completely different or interact in a new way are in fact going to be proven false. People are kind of stubborn often in their habits and beliefs and what have you. But you can't differentiate the ones that will work from those that won't, other than by running experiments, other than by trying stuff. And so that's been kind of the gap when it comes to social innovation, is actually lots of money. When you look at philanthropy plus government plus now the emerging impact investment sector, which is already expected to hit like $2 trillion next year or something, that's growing really fast, but at the more conservative end still. Across all of those, we have an angel investment, an impact angel gap. So the social change world writ large is a little bit like a world with all VCs but no angels. And I think one of the key gaps between those two groups is not just what they look for, but actually whose money has been invested. VCs invest other people's money. Angels invest their money. That makes all the difference in the world. Because when you're investing your money, you can do it for whatever reason is most important to you. You can be as purposeful as you want to be. You can be as curious as you want to be. You can just support your friends. And that's really important too. You can just you can just back people. I'm a big believer in that. It doesn't always have to like stack up on a spreadsheet. You're just like, I believe in that person. Or just, they've been there for me, I'm going to be there for them. Those are all really fundamental, core, important human motivations that all get stripped away when you're investing someone else's money. You're not allowed to invest someone else's money because you're super curious. You're not allowed to invest someone else's money because you just love this guy and believe in them and really want to see what happens next. You can't invest someone else's money because you're just like, this is important for the world and it aligns with my purpose. And so the act of ever investing other people's money forces this conservative, because you have to be able to justify it. You say, I invested your money because, and that requires that you point to something beyond your own motivations, your own instincts, your own beliefs, which puts you back on the spreadsheet, which requires then that they be investable in this spreadsheet context. So my great frustration with impact, this has always been the problem with philanthropy. Lots of money, but everyone wanting to support things already proven to work. How do we prove new things work? That'd be fine if the world itself evolved really slowly, but we live in a world that evolves really fast. So we have to build the capacity to innovate rapidly. Social enterprise should be better at this, to come right back to the very start of your question. Sorry for such a long-winded answer, but isn't so far, because sadly we're seeing in some ways, while social enterprise and impact investment, so this is specifically talking about social enterprises that are structured as for-profits, but which have a very clear impact model, and that they can be very successful startups. You look in the Australian context, and Sendle, the delivery startup, Car Next Door, recently purchased by Uber, but that was an impact investment, clearly has a strong environmental benefits of car sharing, and so on. So they can be very commercially successful companies. But at the moment, sadly, the impact investors will only invest in companies that non-impact investors would invest in. They want there to also be impact, but they won't trade off any of their financial expectations for impact. So provided that you are able to tick all the usual boxes in terms of your traction, investability, and so on, then they want impact as well. And that means, once again, that there's both there's a real conservatism on the where you have to be and the level of data and evidence you need. And there's also, I think, more deeply that when it comes to impact investing, a lot of the early players in the space still feel like they're proving the model, proving that you can invest only in impactful companies and earn traditional financial returns. And so everyone, I think, is stressed that like one big failure will prove the whole model wrong in front of people's eyes, which is sad. That's a lack of confidence in our own story and our own beliefs and our impact. We should be past that, but we're not. That everyone's trying to bat 100% on everything to say, see, you can do it, but you can't increment your way to the better world we need. We do need innovation, and that requires we get much better at thinking about how to support things not yet proven to work, so that they can do the work of proving or not proving that it works.
Yeah, that's an amazingly helpful definition around innovation, that if you're really extending an idea or a model that's already there, you could be innovative but it's not necessarily innovation. And what I think I'm hearing in your response, and please correct me if I go off on a tangent here, is that true innovation is very risky, and you're going to probably have more failures than you're going to have successes. And that in the non-entrepreneurial business world is a massive red flag to those that want to see ongoing profitability. And I can understand the dilemma. If only you could get more angel, thousands or billions more angel investors that are prepared to come in without those strings attached. And I can understand from the corporate world point of view, when you've got governance arrangements and you are managing other people's money, and I could only, anything that came to mind as you were giving your definition there was around superannuation funds, that they invest money in low, high, and medium risk investments, because I guess in that world, they understand that people that are investing for their own retirement, that they want to try and see if they can push things and get a supernormal profit if they can. But if not, they've got all those bases covered. And I would be a special kind of idiot if I said I have the answer for you, but it's a very wicked problem to have. But it also suggests to me that you'll have more people wanting to work in this space to try and find the answer to the age-old problem, or at least come up with a process to navigate what you've painted is potentially some complex thinking. And
we think we do have one solution.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Which is, you've got to give more people the opportunity to invest their own money in things they believe in. And so that's crowdfunding, in other words. And that's why we started with crowdfunding. As I was thinking about this, we do a much more diverse array of things now, but we began life as a pure crowdfunding platform for social impact projects. And that was after, my original co-founder, Alex Buda, and I had a big brainstorm as to how do we help more people get on the social entrepreneurship journey? How do we increase the pace of innovation, reduce the barriers a little bit? And we believe that social entrepreneurs all entrepreneurs really, need three core types of capital: financial capital, but also intellectual capital. So learning how to do things or accessing smart people who can do those things. And then relational capital. It's really important to be in community with people who care about you and who maybe are on a similar journey, because burnout is one of the great sources of failure in all entrepreneurial endeavors, in all innovation endeavors, because of those setbacks inevitably that you talked about. And we wanted to do all three, but at the very beginning, it's often risky to try and do all things at once. And so we thought financial was the place to start, because that's kind of the one people often lack for the others, but they are often very focused on their lack around the financial piece. And so we're thinking about this absolutely, this lack of angel investment capital. And we thought, what are some other approaches? What else are we seeing? And at the time, I also quite involved in creative communities, the Burning Man community in America. So I'd seen the rise of Kickstarter over the previous couple of years, massively used by those communities. And a bit of a light bulb went off for us that they're solving the same problem in a different context. But in the creative worlds used to also be very conservative, because it was a world of gatekeepers. That if you were a musician, no one even got to hear. You think that that's about audiences liking music, but it wasn't. It was about record labels liking music, because if you couldn't get a record label on board, you couldn't get played on the radio. No one could hear you. No one could even get to decide if they liked you for yourself. And so there's famous stories, like the famous ones, I forget the exact number, but the Beatles were knocked back by 70 record labels or something. I mean, that's like, why was that? Because their music was innovative. It didn't sound like what came before. And so experts are really bad at picking successful innovation, actually. And the thing I always think about that I think we don't ask ourselves enough is, how many musical geniuses on the same level as the Beatles did we miss out on because they didn't have the personal resilience of the Beatles? Most people are not going to pitch to the 70th record label. The Beatles did, and that's why we got the Beatles in the world. But maybe one more no, and the Beatles might never have existed. That's a classic innovation challenge. And the way that Kickstarter got around that, of course, was by allowing artists to connect directly with audiences, who then could say, I want to hear more of your music, but instead of me having to put my career on the line, spend tens of thousands of dollars, sign you to a giant contract, and I can just chip in $30, and then you'll send me your new CD or whatever. And that changed, obviously record labels still play an important role, but it changed it meant what you often see now is that musicians prove there's an audience for their work and then get signed by record labels. And so that's what we're also seeing now, social change, that social entrepreneurs prove that there is some audience for their work, some community willing to support. And of course, they take those funds and spend them to build evidence, to do things that then allow them to collect data and evidence. And every additional piece of evidence means you can kind of open the next door, hopefully, for that person who's a little bit more risk averse than the previous person, but now you have a little bit more evidence. And then hopefully you can get their funds and do more, build more evidence, and you get to that next level. And so on a very simple level, part of how crowdfunding works is allows you to spread risk differently. That, you know, someone needs $50,000 to do a high risk activity. I mean, I wouldn't give them $50,000 either. I understand why foundations and government are not giving them $50,000. They're stuck in a bit of a world where they tend to fund all of something or none of it. It's a $50,000 project. Do we want to fund that whole project? No, we'd carry. But it's easy to chip $50 into a cool, risky, interesting project, and it doesn't work. Oh well, they gave it a go. That was pretty cool. It was only $50. You know, people invest what they can, and so just that flexibility of being able to, as they say in the phone, you know, amortize the risk, fractionalize the risk across numbers of people, and that allows everyone to find their own acceptable risk level. I might think this project, you know, I'm only in for 50, but you feel comfortable giving them $500, whatever it is. Someone else might give them $5,000, and they ultimately get to their $50,000. No one would have given them $50,000. And you even see that cascading risk tolerance within a crowdfunding campaign, that the hardest contributions are the very first ones. But as each new person contributes, it becomes a little bit easier, a little bit safer feeling for the next person to contribute, because they're like, at a certain point, you go, hundreds of people trust this person. Who am I not to trust them? They've got, you know, they've kind of evidenced that they're doing something right. And so we've just actually, that's, you know, always been, that's where we started. We then moved a lot into capacity building, because I guess to that point I said before, people often think what they're lacking is financial capital, but actually there's something else they're lacking. So the problem with running a crowdfunding campaign is people only turn up when they already think they're crowdfundable.
Yeah.
And the truth is they're often not, particularly people with less experience, people with a lived experience, but who've never launched something before. They kind of don't have a clear model in their mind. They don't have any past experience that tells them kind of, where do you need to get to in order to then pitch it? You know, how much clarity is required? How much development? Depending on who you are, a pure idea may be enough. If you have lots of runs on the board and already cultivate a community, you may be able to crowdfund just off your idea. You see that sometimes, but rarely. For most people, they're going to have to do design, show snippets, give us a demo, something, get endorsements, various things that obviously make it feel safer for us. So we've been there for 12 years. And last year, we introduced a new flavor of crowdfunding platform, which is a crowd lending platform for growth-ready impact enterprises. And it's the exact same idea in a way, that we're trying to unblock that impact investment sector, which is so stuck on this fund model. There's almost the only people who actually invest in companies tend to be impact investment funds. Again, and obviously there's a logic to a fund. There's minimums. The minimum you can normally put in for is $1 million. And then the minimum they will invest is usually $1 million, sometimes $2 million. So even if they were, you know, because the cost of due diligence for them is the same when they put in 50,000 or when they put in 2 million. So the logic for them is always, you want to do bigger deals because it's vastly more capital efficient for them. But that's left this big space in the marketplace where it's relatively easy, not really easy, but compared to other stages, lots of ways to raise your first 50,000, crowdfunding, accelerators, a handful of good kind of innovation oriented grants. And then it's pretty easy to raise $1 million if you've got the runs on the board, if you've got the right metrics. There's lots of people who'd love to give you $1 million for your impact enterprise if you're at that stage, and there's almost no one in between. And that's where Lend for Good is allowing people to find individual enterprises, invest as little as $500, get that money back relatively quickly, unlike equity crowdfunding, which is another example of this, but with very long-term and uncertain trade-offs. This is specifically for growth-ready impact enterprises, so it's not for brand new launches. You do need to have some runs on the board, a somewhat predictable model. It can't be pure innovation. It's about scaling up something, you know. So we say innovation, still start some good, test the new idea, find your early adopters, your first supporters. But then when something has become sufficiently predictable that debt is a good instrument for you, that you are confident that if you had $100,000, you could generate $110,000 in return, or more than that, hopefully, but, you know, pay back a loan with interest. There's actually heaps of enterprises at that stage, but they're just still too small for the fund-based investors. So there's a huge market out there, huge market of enterprises that actually have fairly robust proven models, but are capital constrained. They weren't venture funded from the start. They're bootstrapped, which means they struggle to, even when they've proved that something works, they just haven't got the capital to invest in scaling it up. And on the other hand, we think there's lots of people who we see get really excited about the opportunity to invest in specific social enterprises doing specific awesome work in the world from as little as $500. It's just a great experience. And so we're trying to, again, and the beauty of platforms is when they can bring these two markets that have complementary needs together to solve each other's problem.
Yeah, it sounds like you're going to be playing in that space, or you are playing in that space. I have to say, I've had a really good lesson here in social enterprises, and some assumptions I had have been blown out of the water. So I appreciate that, mate. But let me get to the nub for me of this, and why I wanted to bring this back to leadership is, from your experiences, Tom, where do you see the role of leadership is in that innovation context? And I want to ask you the following. It's one question with multiple bits to it. Are leaders the source of that innovation, or entrepreneurs the source of that innovation? Are they enablers of innovation, or some combination of the two?
Definitely some combination in different contexts. But I think the reason that leadership is the right word even is because I think innovation always involves risk. And I think entrepreneurship always involves risks. And I think true leadership is about leading people through conditions of uncertainty. I think that once things are highly certain, it's not really leadership that's required, it's management. And there's, I'm not here to define these things precisely, but I think there is a different flavor there that we all recognize. And there's certain people who are good at everything's well defined, there's good processes in place. And now we're doing just, Q&A and performance management and so on around that, versus people who are leading into that unknown, trying new things. And so I think that while there are certainly very important forms of leadership that are not entrepreneurial. To me, entrepreneurship always involves leadership, as does supporting entrepreneurship. One of the things I often preach to bigger foundations and so on, when I have the chance to speak to them at conferences and so on, is that they don't actually need to be innovative. They often feel a lot of pressure to be innovative, but they're fundamentally bad at it, actually, just because of the pressures of big organizations. And this is true everywhere, I think. Like, big companies are not very innovative either. Even the companies we think of as the most innovative in the world, take Google, for an example. What was the last successful innovation that was actually developed in-house at Google? It's really hard to think of one. Everything they built in-house, Google Wave, has mostly failed. The big successes are the stuff they bought in. YouTube, their self-driving car unit. That's not a big success yet, but what else? Google Maps, a bunch of stuff. Android. Most of their successful innovations from the last 10 years have been purchased. And that's how innovation tends to happen. Small groups of people willing to take those risks. Big organizations are not going to take big risks. Now, sometimes they get good at doing things like, hot housing, putting them off in a different, but that again is the same context. You try and create something that feels like a small organization outside of the big organization. But there's, I think, a certain conservatism that always emerges in big organizations where there are too many layers of approval, too many people involved, too many chefs in the kitchen. And so I don't know that it's the right place for innovation to occur, I think, but what they need to get good at is how to engage with innovation, how to foster innovation. And that often means being an early supporter. And I think that requires leadership as well. That first follow idea, it can often feel very risky to be a first follower of innovation as well. So some of our most successful programs, for instance, we've run a program with ING for many years. And one of the things that has made that program so successful is they've been willing to be a first supporter of new social enterprises. And that's really hard. You get that first reasonable sized corporate to give you anything and to endorse you in any way. They're often really risk averse about these things for reputation. They have more on the line, reputation and lots of customers and media scrutiny and so on. But we got to actually do a big audit of that program. We've been running this program called Dream Starter for 7 years, leading up to 2 years ago. And during COVID, did a big audit of it instead of, just running it every year as we had been. It stopped for a couple of years, but we did some analysis. And two things struck out. One was that growth challenge I was telling you about before. We'd supported 70 or so emerging B2C impact enterprises, all product focused is kind of ING's things, stuff that their customers might also like to buy. And of those, more than 2/3 were still trading, which was amazing for an 8-year-old program. And of those, that approximate third that shut down, half in the previous 18 months. So COVID casualties. But incredible survival rates, actually, because, purpose-driven, resilient entrepreneurs who'd found something that worked sufficiently to allow them to keep doing it, pay salaries and so on. But hardly any of them had really grown, had scaled. And it's just that lack of capital to allow for that scale, especially for those that are for-profits at the moment. The philanthropy is doing a better job of supporting some of the ones that are structured as non-profits that allows them to receive philanthropic support while also doing business activities. That can be a nice blend for some. on the for-profit side, there isn't an equivalent appetite. But to come back to the point, I think being that first follower is really, I'm sure you and many of your viewers would have seen before that classic first follower video from the Sasquatch Music Festival with the crazy guy dancing, and then the first guy comes up, and then it becomes a movement. I'm really fond of showing people that video because I think it really does show that, yeah, while it takes a certain, it certainly does take courage and risk to be that crazy dancing guy. In my experience, actually, the crazy dancing guy equivalents are very driven. So in some ways, it doesn't even feel like they're not even aware. Just like he was so in it, he wasn't aware. He wasn't feeling that risk actually, because he was so in his purpose, so to speak, in the moment, into something. But that he's just in his context, his bubble in many ways. And in some ways, that's what a lot of founders are like. Like it feels like I'm doing something that's really risky, but actually, like I'm so single-minded that I'm not even aware of that fact. It's just what I'm doing. This is just what I'm about. It's hard to even imagine the other thing I would be doing. People often ask me, wouldn't have been easier to just kind of get a corporate job? And in some ways, I even have I had trouble wrapping my head around that counterfactual. I'm like, doesn't sound like me, but I have done that. The first follower is often the person who's aware, who's seen the crazy dancing guy, is aware that all these people are looking at them, but is still willing to step up next to them. And in some ways, I think it's a very different type of courage, but it's an essential form of leadership and courage. And that could be, there's lots of ways to do that are relatively low risk, but it's just been willing again to support things that are not yet proven to work, and to not be agonized over the fact that some percentage of things not yet proven to work will in fact not work. And that's not a disaster. That's nothing to be ashamed of. It's all just part of the process of trying to build a better world.
Yeah, I fully agree. In fact, I have a lot of time and I admire people that have a higher threshold and tolerance of ambiguity and risk than I do. And I think I think for me, and this is a personal view, that's either in your DNA or it's not. I don't think you can teach people to be more tolerant of risk. You can
No, you can't, but you can totally change the risks.
Sure. Yeah. I don't deny that. I'm just saying on an individual level, if you're fundamentally hardwired to be conservative, and I don't mean that conservative politically, conservative in your approach to risk taking, that has its own set of barriers. But yeah, I totally agree. And you've made this point through the discussion, and it's a good one, that changing the context or impacting the context in which you operate can maybe change what that risk profile looks like. And one thing you said before, I've lived in the world of government grants, and they either go all in or don't at all. It would be interesting and quite a change of pace if you had particularly federal governments that would fund those smaller scale projects to the amount that you were talking about before, that maybe it's not the $50,000 grant, but maybe it's $2,000 towards something, and to help build that the need to have some capital, because any way you cut it, you're going to need some funds to do what it is that you're doing to get off the ground if you're going to be viable longer term.
And a good way they can do that. Sorry,
you're right.
Because I think there are a couple of governments that have done that better. And I think one approach that I think kind of works for everyone is, I'm a bit biased, I run an intermediary that does a lot of capacity building services, but it's to fund intermediaries that provide opportunities. That's sometimes called, in the US, they call that the Israel model. Israel really over-indexes for startups. And it's because the Israeli government has pumped money into the intermediary sector. There's a disproportionate number of accelerators, co-working spaces, entrepreneurial programs. There should be. And in some ways, that creates that condition that more people get to try more things at lower risk. They get that support. The government doesn't have to pick winners. The government's not directly funding projects. The fact that, that the accelerator, it can be a success even as 80% of its companies fail. And so it provides government, I think, with less of that anxiety on a case-by-case basis about individual startups failing, and gets them thinking more about the ecosystem. And actually, just it's the volume of things that gets tried will tend to fairly naturally, if more people get to try more things with a reasonable amount of infrastructure and support around them, we'll just find more things that work. That's just how it goes. And so Victoria, I think in Australia, has done that particularly well through Launch Vic and Startup Vic and so on. And it's interesting, actually, looking on the eastern seacoast of Australia, and it may not be as distinct now, but I remember a few years ago, I got to thinking about how different the approaches of the three governments were, in terms of they all want more startups, more entrepreneurship, that starting to want more social entrepreneurship as well, but particularly, entrepreneurship, startups, very so hot right now. Victoria does it by funding intermediaries, or what I would call infrastructure. Lots of support for co-working spaces, conferences, convenings, accelerators, courses, lots of funded courses, lots of free places, lots of great opportunities, lots of chances for feedback, mentorship, learning, etc. New South Wales is more about giant projects. So $100 million into the Sydney Startup Hub, $50 million into the Sydney School for Entrepreneurship, another giant project just opened, the Western Sydney Startup Hub. They love big buildings. They love putting in a big project and then they can, cut the ribbon. And that's a form of infrastructure. Sydney Startup Hub's been, I think, good for the sector here and kind of giving it more of a center of gravity and increasing. And then Queensland used to just bribe startups to move to Queensland. They had a couple of different programs. So they're like, if you move your startup to Queensland, we'll give you $50,000. And I think on some level, that actually does a lot as well. If you just bring in 15 new energetic startups with teams that
no, Tom, not a bribe, an incentive to move.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, they're funded, but in some ways less focused on the local and more that we will stimulate the local by bringing in more startups from other places that already have a bit of traction, and that will create more mentors, examples, inspiration, jobs, etc. So, but I'm a bit of a believer in the Victorian strategy as the one that I think I've seen, I think, be most successful, that both provides that opportunity I really care about, but does so in a way that understands that government is not going to be a high risk angel investor on a company by company basis. They need to fund other types of things that, tick their boxes and their needs in a different way. And I think there's a way of bringing that together. And ditto on an individual organization basis. You can do what ING has done with us, create a program that brings really interesting early stage social impact startups or organizations to you around a particular theme. Or you could, as simple as, one example I sometimes use is Friends of the Earth in London have a program that provides some free office space. They have a big building in the middle of London, super valuable space. And so they host like 4 non-profit or campaigning or social impact startups kind of new things a year in their space, and that just provides a lot of learning for their staff as well. And that contact with that fostering innovation, partnering with innovation, being willing to be an early, a first supporter of innovation is at least as important as the actual innovator, I think, because you need all of those, not just the inventors. Hard to get anywhere. It's not just money. Actually, it's not money at first. This is, I think, a mistake some people make, Eric, not to go on too much of another tangent, I hope, but people often think I need money to do anything, but actually you often need support, and money is one form of support. But what do you need money for? To pay for things, right? What is it you need to pay for? Do people have that thing anyway? And might they be willing to give you the thing that you otherwise thought you needed money to pay for, like maybe office space, like accounting, like whatever the things that you think you need to pay for, it is often actually easier to sell your story, pitch yourself to the providers of those things directly and see if you can access them. And that's, again, a way of often feels less risky for people.
Yeah, in
providing
a huge way.
and can allow you to make that progress and build that evidence.
Yeah, because I like that angle there around what is a cost of getting things off the ground. Well, if you had a business space, and that could usually be 40% of any income you're bringing in, if that's provided, then it's one less issue around raising funds that you need to be necessarily worried about. And space in the middle of London for social entrepreneur, social enterprises to start up is probably gold, in the sense that you got a space in the middle of a key city center. And I like that idea of if you can help create the infrastructure and the fundamentals around what you need to foster innovation, then hopefully they will come. Build the infrastructure and they will come. And I get that. Look, Tom, this has been an amazing discussion. Thank you for helping me link that in a lot of ways to leadership, and there are vast amount of more questions I want to ask you, but I think we can come back again. And definitely, so for those that are listening, how can they get in touch with you, mate, if they want to talk more about this social enterprise space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess check out StartSomeGood. We've built a whole ecosystem of opportunities. So our goal is to help more people essentially get their impact ideas out of their head and into the world where it can make a real difference. And we do that in a variety of ways through, these days, 2 flavors of crowdfunding platform, Lend for Good and StartSomeGood.com. But we also deliver a range of courses and capacity building programs, including a membership community of founders or early stage social entrepreneurs called the StartSomeGood Network, which is a low monthly cost. You get invited to 5 events a month on an online peer space. So StartSomeGood.com to really read about all of that. As I said, we also partner with many like more established organizations, companies, and institutions to then build programs or deliver programs that support that early stage social innovator if they're looking to foster innovation in their particular area of interest or key cause area. For me personally, and then StartSomeGood on all the main networks, at StartSomeGood on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. For me personally, LinkedIn's the main place that I share kind of somewhat more thoughtful thoughts. A bit of a broken sentence about social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, fundraising, so on, and then Twitter for, sharing links and stuff like that. So I'm at TomJD on Twitter, and then if you just look up Tom Dawkins, I should probably be the first one at the top of the list in LinkedIn, or if that doesn't work, just Tom Dawkins StartSomeGood in search will certainly find me.
That was Tom Dawkins. I'd like to thank Tom for his time and sharing his ideas around leadership, innovation, and social enterprise. As always, thanks for supporting the podcast. You can help by dropping a like on this particular episode, or you can become a subscriber to help me grow the channel. Stay safe, thanks for your time, and we'll catch everyone on the next episode of Talking Leadership TV.